All right, so in chapter 9, what we're talking about is how we move back towards equilibrium. So hopefully you remember that in our microeconomics, we had this model of supply and demand where when the quantity supplied was equal to the quantity demanded, we ended up with an equilibrium price and quantity. And so we're going to talk about that briefly in this video, how we will sort of move back to equilibrium when we get some sort of shock. And then in the next video, we're going to apply that to the labor market. So it's always good to remember that as powerful as the supply and demand model is, there's a lot of times where markets will not be in equilibrium, and we still use that supply and demand model because we believe that there are forces that push us back to equilibrium. So let's just work through some examples and see what happens. So the whole idea is that when we're out of equilibrium, there's some pressure in the market so that firms and customers will respond, and because there will be some profit making ability, and that will push us back into equilibrium. So we're going to look specifically, first at just a regular goods market, and then, as I said, we'll look at a labor market, and then finally we'll look at financial assets and why they might not be in equilibrium. The important thing to remember is how economic rents play a role, right? Remember, the idea of economic rent is that people can make a profit above and beyond what's normal in the economy. And so when markets are out of equilibrium, that's a profit-making opportunity. So let me move myself up here. When we have excess supply or demand, then there's going to be some sort of rent-seeking behavior. Either firms are going to start increasing prices and producing more, or they're going to start decreasing prices and producing less, right? And then eventually we will get to the equilibrium. And so we're going to sort of walk through the process of market equilibration in these types of markets, right? So we'll look at a market for hats, we'll look at a market for bread, and then in the next video we'll look at the market for workers. All right, so here we have a market for hats, and we can see we have our demand curve, and we have our supply curve, and we have our equilibrium, where hats are $8 and we're selling like 24,000 hats. So what happens when demand changes, right? All of a sudden people are like, oh, hats are cool, right? I mean, I kind of miss the time when, guys always wore hats going outside. You wouldn't be caught dead outside without a hat, but, not anymore. So, but what if we brought it back, right? With new demand for hats, demand goes up. So what happens, right? In micro, you might have said, well, we moved to this new equilibrium here where the supply curve and the new demand curve meet. And that's true, but we're sort of missing part of the story. And so how does that happen? Well, we've got some sort of excess demand. If prices stay at this $8, then people are going to want to buy 37,000 hats. And there's only 24,000 hats being supplied. So a lot of people want to buy hats. What's going to happen first is that firms are going to say, hey, you know what, we can actually charge more for these 24,000 hats, right? We can charge $14 instead of $8. And that's a profit-making opportunity. That's a rent-seeking, rent-producing opportunity to sell at a higher value. And so they increase their prices and we move from point A to point B. Now at point B, 24,000 hats are being sold for $14 each, and we're at an equilibrium of sorts, right? But there are going to be some hat sellers that say, you know what, I can actually sell for less than $14 and get some more sales and increase my profit. And so that's what they're going to do, right? We're going to see them decreasing prices until we get to a new equilibrium at point C, where the equilibrium price of hats is $10 and the equilibrium quantity is somewhere around 32,000. Now that's going to take some time, right? Because before we were only making 24,000 hats. Now we have to make 32,000 hats, and that's going to take some time to produce the more hats. And so we're going to sort of jump up from A to B and then move down the new demand curve to point C. The key here is that we'll only have trades on this, what's called the short side of the market, right, where these thick lines are. And that means that we move from point A to point B and then down towards the new equilibrium. We don't actually sell anything over here. So let's think about what happens if there's a decrease in demand. Right now, maybe all of a sudden people don't realize how cool hats are and they don't want to wear them as much. All right, well, we know that at this price, $8, we're going to have too much supply, right? We have an excess supply. People only want to buy about 13,000 hats, but firms are producing 24,000 hats. So what's going to happen? Well, now sellers who can produce hats more cheaply, right, for under $8 per hat, are going to have an opportunity to sell at a lower price, right, somewhere between $8 and their costs, which in this case it looks like it's about $4. And so they're going to sell hats, and people who already have hats to sell are going to be forced to sell at a much lower price, right? Something below $8. And so now the short side is where these thick lines are, right? It's always going to be to the left of the new equilibrium. And eventually, we will move down to our new price, in this case $6 and 16,000 hats, and all of those rent-seeking opportunities will have disappeared. We can do the same thing when there's a change in supply, right? So this example is an increase in the supply of bread, perhaps due to a new technology, right? Maybe new ovens, new ingredients, whatever it is, but we can produce bread more cheaply. And so what happens is that our original equilibrium was here at point A, where the price was €2 and 5,000 loaves of bread. The new supply curve comes about because of the lower technology, right? And we already saw that if you have this new technology, you get these innovation rents, which is a form of economic rent. And so we move down from point A to a lower price. And then because consumers want to buy more at that lower price, we move back up the new supply curve until we get to point B. And so again, it's all about firms responding to profit incentives in order to move us from the old equilibrium to the new equilibrium.